Hey nerds, what's up? So I get asked a lot about book recommendations for kids. People message me saying they have a kid in their life, whether it's a neighbor, godchild, niece, nephew, their own kids, and how do I get them into reading? How do I get them to love fantasy? I have 2 kids. I talk about how much they love to read a lot, and we have read a lot, so I always have a ton of recommendations. However, I am getting tired of typing the same thing out over and over again when I get this question. So I thought I would just formalize it into a video that I can point people to. Now, I will say I'm going to put a list of all the books I recommend here on like a Google Doc, and I'll put that link in the description box. So if you just want something high level that you can glance at really quickly and see all the recommendations I have, that will be a resource for you in the description box. In this video, I am gonna give like a little bit of a statement on each book to maybe guide what kind of kid it would be good for, whether in reading level or age or personality or whatever. That will be missing from the overview list, but I wanted to offer that as an option in case you don't want to sit here and watch this about all the recommendations, or you just want to be able to look at it later. Okay, with that, I will see you after the jump. Okay, so the first category is beginning/young readers, and these books are going to be anywhere 3 to 8 years old for the most part. This section is going to be primarily for kids who are starting to get into reading, who can read independently, but it is also a great section for people if you want to increase the attention span of your kids, maybe have them get used to longer connected narratives. These books can also be great to read out loud as first chapter books to your kids. So I think this category can be great for either those independent readers or for kind of lengthening the attention span of your child as you read aloud to them as you move from picture books or shorter narratives to longer ones. My first recommendation is the Dragon Master series by Tracy West, and I would say this is ages 3+. If you take one recommendation from this video, it is this one. I have recommended this to so many people. We have bought this series for so many people, and everybody has become obsessed, no matter the kid, no matter their interest. For whatever reason, Dragon Masters is just the thing. It follows 8-year-olds who become dragon masters, which means they have a dragon that they have a connection with, and they go on adventures. So these are great for beginning readers because of the number of pictures they have, the short chapters, bigger text, and obviously shorter chapter books. So I feel like they're good at keeping kids engaged and practicing that longer chapter type narrative. They are also extremely fun to read out loud. I'm gonna be honest, I love this series. Some of the series, when you read out loud to your kids, you're like, this is a little torture. My husband and I both really love these books. They're fun. We have our favorites. We have our favorite drag. We have our favorite stories. Like, they're just well written. They're very fun. And even my kid, who has outgrown this reading level for years, still reads every new one because he loves the story so much. So this is one of our favorite recommendations. Another great thing about Dragon Masters is that you get introduced to a new Dragon Master every book. So there are so many different kinds of personalities or kids who are from different places or look different. And so you can probably find a Dragon Master who resonates with the kid you are gifting to. I also appreciate that there have been Dragon Masters who are blind and deaf and are in wheelchairs, so there's a lot of great representation as well. This was also my son's first chapter book that I read out loud to him that he felt interested enough to stay in, so this is, again, great for beginning readers and also great for kind of increasing that length capacity. My next recommendation is the Princess in Black series by Shannon Hale and Dean Hale, and I would also say this is 3+. Now, I do want to say, as much as I hate talking about books that are for girls or boys, I know that these may look more geared toward girls, but my son is actually the one we bought these for. He loved this series, and we actually found out about this series from our other friend whose son loved it. So I would say, even if it looks maybe gendered, it's not as gendered as you think. This is a story that follows a princess who is also a secret superhero, and she goes on little adventures. It's very adorable. Once again, like Dragon Masters, this book has short chapters, lots of pictures, and big print, which makes it a perfect transitional tool for beginning readers who want to get into longer things. These are also fun to read out loud. I read many of these out loud, and they are very fun stories. The next one is a bit of a classic, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it, and that's the Magic Tree House series by Mary Pope Osborne. Now, these I would say are more for 5+, more for those readers that are reading independently, and the reason is I actually don't think these are that enjoyable to read out loud, just my personal opinion. And the reason for that is something that actually makes them great first chapter books for beginning readers, which is that a lot of words are repetitive. For an extreme example, I remember somewhere, I couldn't find where it was, but it was like, Jack unzipped his backpack, took out his binder from his backpack, and zipped his backpack back up. And you're like, wow, that was a lot of language about the backpack. But in my research, that kind of repeating of words is really helpful for kids with comprehension when they're learning to read. When you have those kind of repeated statements, then they can better understand the narrative. I hope I'm making sense. Because of that, not as enjoyable in my opinion to read these books out loud, but really great for kids who are learning to read. Obviously, there are a million of these. There's like 40 in the main series, and then there's Merlin missions, and it's all about Jack and Annie, siblings who find a magic treehouse that transports them to different locations in time. Once again, short. These have less pictures, a little bit more text, which is also why I give it the older age range in general. Okay, my next of my primary recommendations is gonna be the Geronimo Stilton series, particularly the Kingdom of Fantasy set. Geronimo Stilton, first, let me say, it says it's by Geronimo Stilton. It's kind of like the series of unfortunate events that has a fake author. So these are written by the mouse Geronimo Stilton about his adventures. There are a ton of different series in this. There's like a space series and a caveman series and this fantasy series. These ones are our favorites. I should also mention, I know this says like the 11th adventure. The great things about these is they can be read totally out of order. There's very little connection between any of them. But why these are so great for beginning readers, again, I would say 5+, is the inside. They have set up to be so eye-catching. So many words are bolded, are colorful. There's a million pictures. The pictures often have puzzles in them. It's a very engaging read. So if you have a kid who's feeling intimidated by lots of text, these stories are long, so they can help increase their kind of patience for that, but there's so much visually to look at, I feel it helps keep kids' interest. Now, in my personal opinion, again, this is a book that is not super fun to read out loud. It's not one I would necessarily choose just to read out loud to your kids, but as someone who's independently trying to become a stronger reader, I think it's a great resource. Okay, those were my top 4 recommendations, the one that I gift the most, but they're kind of well known. So if you've already known those, I have kind of a quick fire recommendation section here of other series that my kids have loved. First up, we've got The Kingdom of Renly, which is about a prince and his friend who find a dragon and go on adventures. There's The Secret Explorers, about a group of kids who each has a scientific specialty and they have to go save a certain region. There's Mercy Watson, which is about a pet pig who gets into funny situations. There's The Diary of an Ice Princess, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's a princess with ice powers. There's The Isle of Misfits, about a bunch of fantasy creatures who don't belong and so are on an island that's a school. And then Axel and Beast, about a boy who has a robot, and it's kind of like Transformers adjacent. Once again, these are all pretty much the 3 to 8 age range, could be really good to read out loud to younger children or for kids who are just starting to read chapter books and become a stronger reader. Also, these racks obviously could be for children older than 8 if they are still struggling with chapter books. I think these are a great start. I want to do a quick note before we move on about Scholastic recommendations. So Scholastic has this designation where they talk about having acorn books, which you can see up in the corner, it's at the side, and branches books here. And these are 2 kind of designations for simpler books, which are the acorn books, more beginning books, going into branches, which are a little older young readers. And what I absolutely love about this designation is that there are a ton of different books, both in acorn and branches, and they are so perfectly leveled. So these acorn books, are all gonna be very similar. They basically are all pictures with very little text per page, perfect for those really beginning independent readers. And then the branches books, Dragon Masters, which is one of the branches books, they have longer walls of text. They are chapter books, right? We're dealing with chapters, but they still have pictures on every page. And the great thing is there are so many categories within these books. There's books about video games and dragons and princesses and fairies and cats and animals and whatever you want. So I think they're a really great resource if you're trying to increase your kids' reading. that you can kind of find any interest at these perfectly leveled things. So you can search up Scholastic Acorn or Scholastic Branches books, which I think is a great start for building a library or gifting books to kids. We're gonna move on to our next section, which is middle grade, which is usually designated as the ages 8 to 12. But this is something that you're really just gonna have to know your reader as you move into. These books are going to have very few pictures, if any. They are going to have longer walls of text with smaller print and probably longer chapters. They will also have more complicated stories and more overarching elements to remember. My son, for example, was ready for these type of stories very early. He was a very early reader, and the way he learned to read and consume stories meant he was ready for these kind of longer, no-picture narratives, very comfortable with them very early on. Whereas other kids in my life, and probably my daughter as well when she gets there, will probably be a lot older when she is ready for these stories just because of how she learned to read and kind of her patience for those things. So once again, you're really gonna have to know kind of the skill level of your kid or the kid you're buying for, and whether they're ready kind of for these longer narratives. That said, if you're a parent or guardian and you want to prepare your kid to be interested in these longer stories, then these are all great to read aloud. I've read out loud several of these to my kids. They are super enjoyable, I feel like, for adults alike. So that's another great way you can engage your kids in stories that may be a little bit more difficult and take more energy to invest in. Okay, with that, let's start with a classic that I feel like a lot of people overlook, and that is The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. This was my favorite book as a kid. This is actually my copy, which is why it kind of looks well loved. And my son also absolutely loved this. This is a very silly book. It has a lot of word play, a lot of clever things that I think kids really like. And it's about a boy who's so bored and there's nothing to do, and he gets taken to a new world where he kind of appreciates things more. Very silly, very just a pleaser, a crowd pleaser. Fun fact, this was actually given to me by a neighbor, so give books to kids in your life. The next is a book that I feel is underrated because I just don't feel I hear a lot of people talking about it, which is the Wing Feather Saga. This is a much more classic fantasy adventure. You know, it's following kids who are in danger and trying to save their town, and just really more of that classic fantasy. Anyway, it's so good. We've gifted this to a lot of kids and they've all loved it. There's also a TV show that's being made. In fact, season 2 just came out about book 2, and it is on a network. I think it's on the VidAngel network, actually. And my kids are really loving this series too, based off the book, but this is a good one. And don't forget, our favorite adult authors sometimes have good kid books. Of course, I'm talking about Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians by Brandon Sanderson. This book is fantastic. We have given this to a ton of people. It's the book for kids who love silly things. It is a very funny book. It follows Alcatraz and some of his family members, and the thing about them is that they each have a talent that helps them do things, but they're very silly talents. For example, Alcatraz's talent is that he can break things, and his grandfather's talent is that he's always late. And they use this in hilarious ways to be advantageous, and it's a great read. I actually started by reading this out loud to my son because I wanted to see what it was about, because Brandon Sanderson's my favorite author. And then my son said we read it too slow, and I wasn't allowed to read him the other ones because he wanted to race through them, and he raced through the other 4 or 5. I think there's 6 in the series. Raced through the other 5 in like a couple of weeks. They're fantastic. Highly recommend. Brandon Sanderson also has another middle grade that my son really loved. I didn't have it in the right stack, which is The Arithmetist. This one, I will say though, I think is more difficult than Alcatraz. It has smaller print, way bigger walls of text. It is spookier. Like, I think the storyline in general is just a little bit older. So I think this one's a little bit more challenging. If you have a younger reader, I would maybe start with Alcatraz. My son did absolutely love this though, read it several times, so it's still a great one. And then another reminder of childhood classics that I feel like are sometimes forgotten is just anything by Gail Carson Levine. Ella Enchanted and The Two Princes of Barmere in particular really defined my personal childhood. I mean, if you want to know how many times I read this book as a kid, look at that. These are great. Ella Enchanted follows a girl who is cursed with having to be obedient, and The Two Princes of Barmere follows 2 sisters, one of who's really brave and one who's timid. When the brave one falls sick, the timid one has to go out on an adventure to rescue her. These are just so great. What I will say about these books is even though they obviously have a lot of adventure, you can tell by the description, they also focus a lot on the inner lives of the main character. Like it's a lot of kind of emotional, appropriately aged emotional turmoil. So it would definitely be for a kid who is definitely into more of that emotional kind of story that focuses on the character themselves. So once again, those are my 4 favorite recommendations that I buy the most often, but here are some other recommendations that we also love. There's The Secret of Platform 13, another one from my childhood, and it follows a group of travelers from a magical island who have to find a child that was stolen years ago in the real world. How to Train Your Dragon. Yes, it's a book series, but it's actually very different from the movies. It's very silly and sarcastic. There's Wings of Fire. This is a series that's huge with all the elementary school kids. Trust me, I volunteer there a lot. This is a classic dragon tale. Then there's Coraline. Who could forget my favorite, Neil Gaiman? Coraline is extremely spooky, so I would say it's only for kids who love more scary things like Goosebumps or things like that, but it's still easy for readers to understand in this age group. As a warning, despite loving The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, and it's marketed to middle grade kids, I think that one's definitely the older side of middle grade, like 12 or 13, not because it's inappropriate. It is a little scary, but it's also just much slower of a book. So I think it just takes a lot more attention span to read that one, and I would wait for an older kid. Then Fablehaven, another classic you've probably heard of. This is a story about a fantasy hideaway that the kids' grandfather is a keeper of, kind of classic save the world type story. And then 2 recs that are more sci-fi adjacent. The Lion of Mars, which is about a group of settlers who live on Mars and all of the adults get sick, so it's up to the kids to solve the virus. And The Last Kids on Earth, which is a story about kids in a zombie apocalypse. And then obviously there is Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. Those are just so well known. I've never gifted them because I assume kids will probably have interacted with them, but it's important to mention they are classics for a reason. Kids do love these. Okay, those are the recommendations I have for you today. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you got something. If you have questions about any of these books or individual questions about who you're trying to gift to, I love talking about it, so just ask me in the comment section below. One thing I was gonna say, I've thought in the past about potentially making a video about how to get your kids to love to read. So if that's interesting to anyone, it's on the idea. Tell me below if you'd want a video like that, because I have lots of ideas there as well. Okay, if you like this kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you wanna see what I am currently reading, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.